June 17th, 1943. Naliboki Forest, occupied Belorussia. The dogs are getting closer. Pyotr Volsky can hear them baying through the pine trees, perhaps 800 meters to the north, maybe closer. The German pursuit unit has been tracking his partisan group for 11 hours straight, following their trail through swamp and forest with methodical efficiency. 23 partisan fighters moving through terrain they thought they knew, terrain that was supposed to protect them. And the Wehrmacht tracker teams are closing the distance with professional patience. Pyotr crouches behind a massive oak tree, breathing hard, listening to the sounds of pursuit, the barking of dogs, the occasional shout in German, the crack of branches as soldiers move through underbrush. His group is exhausted. They've been running since dawn, when a German patrol stumbled on their camp near the Usha River. The ensuing firefight cost them 2 fighters killed, one wounded badly enough that he's being carried by 2 others, slowing everyone down. Now, it's 4:30 in the afternoon, and they're trapped. Behind them, the Germans. To the east, the Neman River, too wide and deep to ford. To the west, open farmland where they'd be spotted instantly by Wehrmacht observation posts. Their only hope was to push north through the forest to reach friendly territory controlled by the Bielski partisan group, but German forces have deployed ahead of them. Pyotr's scouts returned 20 minutes ago with devastating news. Germans to the north, Germans to the south, Germans closing from 3 directions. It's a classic encirclement. The Wehrmacht has performed this operation hundreds of times throughout occupied Soviet territory. Pin partisan forces against a natural obstacle, close the ring slowly with superior numbers, eliminate the trapped fighters methodically. The mathematics are brutally simple. 500 German soldiers with machine guns and mortars versus 23 partisans with rifles and perhaps 60 rounds of ammunition per fighter. Pyotr's second in command, a former Red Army sergeant named Viktor Kozlov, crawls up beside him. His face is gray with exhaustion. "We're finished," Viktor whispers. "They'll have us surrounded within the hour." Pyotr doesn't respond immediately. He's thinking about something else, something that has nothing to do with tactics or ammunition counts. He's thinking about the beehives. Pyotr Volsky is 41 years old. Before the war, before the Germans came, before everything changed, he was a beekeeper. Not a soldier, not a fighter, just a man who kept 300 beehives in the Naliboki forest and sold honey to markets in Minsk. He knew this forest better than any map could show. Every clearing, every stream, every stand of linden trees where his bees harvested nectar. He knew the seasonal patterns, where wildlife moved, where swarms gathered in late spring. He knew where the wild hives were. "Viktor," Pyotr says quietly, "do you remember the old sawmill clearing, 3 kilometers northeast? The abandoned one?" "Yes." "What about it?" "There are trees there, massive hollow oaks. I found wild hives in them 5 years ago. Big colonies. Aggressive when disturbed." Viktor stares at him. "You're thinking about bees? Now? I'm thinking about diversion." Pyotr pulls out a crumpled map, spreads it on the ground. "The Germans are tracking us by sound and scent. The dogs follow our trail. The soldiers follow the dogs. What if we give them a different trail? Something that stops them completely? I don't understand. Wild honeybees. European dark bees. Apis mellifera mellifera. When their hive is threatened, they swarm aggressively. Thousands of bees attacking anything nearby. They can sense carbon dioxide in exhaled breath, target faces and eyes. A person can survive maybe 50 stings. 100 stings causes severe toxic reaction. 200 stings can kill. Viktor's expression changes from confusion to understanding. You want to lead the Germans into wild beehives. Not lead them, drive them. If we can reach the sawmill clearing before the encirclement closes, if we can disturb those hives properly, Create a swarm between us and the pursuit force. The bees will attack anything that moves through their territory. The Germans will have to stop, retreat, find another route. That gives us time to break through their northern positions while they're dealing with the swarm. That's insane. You have a better idea? Victor looks back toward the sound of approaching dogs. How do we disturb the hives without getting killed ourselves? Very carefully. Pyotr folds the map. I've been working with bees for 28 years. I know how they react, how to approach hives, how to create controlled disturbance. It's dangerous, but it's possible. A burst of machine gun fire echoes through the forest, perhaps 500 meters away. The Germans are probing forward, trying to locate the partisan position. Time is running out. Victor makes the decision. All right, we go to the sawmill. But if we all die from bee stings, I'm going to be very angry with you. Pyotr Volsky was born on March 3, 1902, in a small village outside Novogrudok. His father kept bees, as his grandfather had before him. The Volsky family had been beekeepers for 4 generations, maintaining hives through Russian imperial rule, through revolution, through collectivization, through Stalin's purges. Bees didn't care about politics. They cared about flowers and weather and the complex social dynamics of the hive. Young Pyotr learned the craft from his father, starting when he was 7 years old. How to approach a hive calmly, moving slowly so bees wouldn't perceive threat. How to read the hum of a colony, distinguishing between contentment and agitation. How to harvest honey without destroying the colony, taking only the surplus, leaving enough for the bees to survive winter. By age 15, he was managing 30 hives independently. Beekeeping is not simple work. It requires understanding biology, weather patterns, plant ecology, and the intricate communication systems bees use. A honeybee colony is a superorganism, 10 to 60,000 individuals functioning as a single entity. They communicate through pheromones and movement, the famous waggle dance that tells other bees where flowers are located. They maintain hive temperature precisely, clustering to generate heat in winter, fanning wings to cool the hive in summer. And they defend their home with absolute commitment. A European dark bee worker carries a barbed stinger connected to a venom sac containing approximately 0.1 milligrams of venom. The barb means the stinger detaches after penetrating skin, tearing the bee's abdomen, killing the bee but continuing to pump venom for several minutes. The venom contains melittin, a peptide that causes pain and inflammation. It also contains alarm pheromones that signal other bees to attack the same target. 1 bee sting is painful. 10 stings are very painful. 50 stings cause systemic reaction, difficulty breathing, rapid heartbeat, nausea. 100 stings can cause organ failure. 200 stings pump approximately 20 milligrams of venom into the bloodstream, enough to kill most humans through toxic shock. Pyotr learned these mathematics early. When he was 12, he disturbed a wild hive accidentally while collecting mushrooms. The colony swarmed, chasing him 300 meters through the forest. He received 17 stings before escaping into a stream and submerging himself. His face swelled grotesquely. He couldn't see through his swollen eyes for 2 days. His father told him afterward, "Bees protect their home. Remember that. Respect it. Never disturb a hive unless you understand what will happen." Pyotr remembered. By 1939, he operated 300 hives scattered throughout Naliboki forest. He sold honey to markets in Minsk, Novogrudok, and Lida. His bees pollinated orchards and farm crops throughout the region. It was peaceful work, productive work, work that connected him to the natural cycles of the forest. Then Germany invaded Poland in September 1939. Then the Soviet Union occupied eastern Poland under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Then Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, and Wehrmacht forces swept across Belorussia in weeks. The occupation was brutal. The Germans established ghettos in every town, concentrating Jewish populations for eventual extermination. They burned villages suspected of harboring partisans. They executed civilians randomly to discourage resistance. Pyotr watched his village destroyed in August 1941 because someone had cut German telephone wires. 17 civilians were shot in the village square, including the teacher who had taught Pyotr to read. Pyotr escaped into the Naliboki forest. Others joined him, other survivors, other men and women who had nowhere else to go. They formed a partisan group, one of hundreds operating in occupied Belorussia. They sabotaged German supply lines, ambushed patrols, provided intelligence to Soviet command. Pyotr became the group's leader not because he was the best fighter, but because he knew the forest better than anyone. He knew where to hide, where to find water, where German patrols wouldn't follow, and he knew where the bees were. The partisan group moves quickly through dense forest, heading northeast toward the abandoned sawmill. Pyotr sets a brutal pace. His fighters are exhausted, but terror provides motivation. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grow steadily closer. The Germans are not rushing, they're advancing methodically, using the dogs to track, maintaining formation to prevent the partisans from breaking through their lines. The wounded fighter, a 19-year-old named Alexei who took a rifle bullet through his shoulder during the morning firefight, is being carried by two others. He's semi-conscious, groaning with each jarring step. They should leave him behind, hide him somewhere with hope that he'd survive until they could return. But Pyotr refuses to abandon wounded fighters. It's a promise he made when he took command. Nobody gets left behind unless they're dead. Victor drops back beside Pyotr. The Germans are maybe 500 meters behind us now. If we don't reach this sawmill soon, they'll have us before we can do anything. 15 more minutes, Pyotr says. Maybe 20. We don't have 20 minutes. Then we run faster. They run faster. The Naliboki forest is ancient, one of the largest remaining primeval forests in Europe. Oak and pine and birch rising from soil that hasn't been plowed in 1,000 years. Swamps and streams cutting through in complex patterns. Dense underbrush that makes movement difficult. It's partisan country, terrain that favors small mobile groups over conventional military forces. But the Germans have adapted. Wehrmacht, anti-partisan operations, have become increasingly sophisticated throughout 1943. They use larger forces, better tracking methods, more systematic approaches to clearing partisan-controlled areas. Units like the one pursuing Pyotr are specifically trained for forest warfare. They carry light equipment, move quietly, employ tracker dogs that can follow scent trails hours old. The dog handlers are the critical threat. German military working dogs, mostly German Shepherds and Dobermans, trained to track human scent across difficult terrain. A good tracker dog can follow a trail that's 8 to 12 hours old, can differentiate between individual human scents, can work for hours without tiring. The Wehrmacht deploys thousands of these dogs in anti-partisan operations. They're devastatingly effective. Pyotr hears them clearly now. The high-pitched baying, that means they're on a hot scent, close to their quarry. The handlers will be right behind them, following the dogs on long leads, rifles ready. 400 meters, maybe less. At 1700 hours, Pyotr's group breaks into the sawmill clearing. It's a large, open space, perhaps 200 meters across, dominated by the collapsed ruins of a timber operation abandoned 15 years ago. The sawmill building itself has collapsed into rotten timbers and rusted machinery. But around the clearing stand massive oak trees, some of them 300 years old, trunks 4 meters in circumference. Pyotr scans the tree line quickly, looking for specific landmarks. There, on the eastern edge, 3 massive oaks standing close together, their trunks scarred by lightning and age. He remembers these trees precisely. 5 years ago, he was tracking a swarm of his domestic bees that had absconded from their hive. He followed them here and watched them settle into a hollow in the largest oak. He investigated and found not 1 but 3 wild colonies occupying hollow spaces in the 3 trees. Wild colonies are different from domestic hives. They're often more aggressive, more defensive, because they lack the selective breeding that makes domestic bees manageable. European dark bees in wild colonies can be exceptionally aggressive when disturbed. There, Pyotr points to the 3 oaks. The hives are in hollow sections about 7 meters up. The entrance holes are small, maybe 10 centimeters across, but the colonies inside are large. I could hear them humming from ground level when I found them. Victor stares up at the trees. How do we disturb them without climbing up there? Smoke won't work. Smoke calms bees by masking alarm pheromones. We want them agitated, not calm. We need physical disturbance to the hive structure. Vibration. Impact. We shoot the trees? Gunfire would alert the Germans immediately. We need something quieter. We need to throw something heavy enough to shake the trees, disturb the colonies, trigger their defensive response. One of the partisans, a former farmer named Dmitri, looks around the clearing. The old sawmill has machinery, heavy pieces. If we can throw chunks of metal against the tree trunks, that might work, Pyotr says. But we need to do this carefully. We disturb the hives, then we retreat immediately to the north, moving through the thinnest part of the German encirclement. The bees will swarm in the clearing. When the Germans arrive with their dogs, they'll walk directly into the swarm. What if the bees chase us instead? Someone asks. They might. Some will. But bee swarms attack what they perceive as the primary threat. If we move quickly after disturbing the hives, and the Germans arrive immediately afterward with dogs barking and men shouting, the bees will focus on them. We just need to be far enough away when the swarm establishes its defensive perimeter. Victor issues quick orders. 5 fighters move to the collapsed sawmill and begin salvaging pieces of metal. Flywheel fragments, saw blade sections, chunks of rusted machinery. Each piece weighs 5 to 10 kilograms, heavy enough to create significant impact when thrown. The rest of the group prepares for immediate retreat. They check weapons, redistribute ammunition, make ready to move the moment Pyotr gives the signal. The sound of German pursuit grows louder. Dogs barking excitedly, whistles, shouted commands. 300 meters away, maybe less. Pyotr takes one of the metal chunks, a piece of flywheel weighing perhaps 8 kilograms. He moves to within 20 meters of the 3 oak trees. Close enough to throw with accuracy, far enough to retreat quickly. He can hear the hives now, a low thrumming hum emanating from the hollow trunks. Each colony contains perhaps 30 to 40,000 bees at this time of year. 3 colonies, over 100,000 bees total. Pyotr has never deliberately disturbed a wild colony before. Everything he learned from his father and grandfather emphasized respecting the bees, working with them peacefully, avoiding actions that would trigger defensive response. What he's about to do violates every principle of good beekeeping. But he's not a beekeeper anymore. He's a partisan leader responsible for 22 other lives. Ready, he calls quietly to Victor. Victor positions the group at the northern edge of the clearing, prepared to move. Pyotr hefts the metal chunk, aims carefully at the largest oak, and throws with all his strength. The metal impacts the trunk with a tremendous hollow boom about 6 meters up, just below where he estimates the hive entrance is located. The entire tree shakes. Birds erupt from the branches, and from the entrance hole, bees begin pouring out. At first, it's just dozens of bees, emerging to investigate the disturbance, then hundreds, then thousands. They spiral around the trunk in a growing cloud, their collective hum rising from a low drone to an angry roar. Pyotr throws a second piece of metal, hitting the middle oak. Same result. Massive vibration, followed seconds later by an eruption of bees from the hollow interior. The third oak receives similar treatment. By the time the metal impacts the trunk, all 3 colonies are fully alerted, thousands of bees pouring from their hives, filling the air around the trees with a dark, swirling mass. Go, Pyotr shouts. North! Now! The partisan group sprints across the clearing toward the northern tree line. Behind them, the swarm continues building, More and more bees emerging, the collective mass growing larger and more agitated with each second. Bees begin following the retreating partisans, perhaps 50 or 60 individuals, workers investigating the perceived threat. Several partisans receive stings. Dmitri curses as a bee stings his neck. Another fighter slaps at bees swarming around her face. But the main swarm remains in the clearing, circling the 3 oak trees, establishing a defensive perimeter. Over 100,000 bees creating a living barrier around their disturbed homes. Pyotr's group crashes into the northern forest line and keeps running, moving fast through the trees, ignoring the scattered bees still pursuing them. The stings are painful but not dangerous in small numbers. They just need distance between themselves and the clearing. Behind them, perhaps 200 meters south, German voices shout commands. The dogs are baying frantically. Very close now. Then Pyotr hears something he's never heard before. A sound that makes him smile even as he runs for his life through the forest. Screaming. The Wehrmacht tracker team enters the sawmill clearing at 1717 hours. 8 soldiers, led by a sergeant named Otto Becker, accompanied by 2 dog handlers and 4 dogs. They're moving fast, following the obvious trail left by the fleeing partisans, confident that they're about to overtake their exhausted quarry. Becker sees the clearing ahead, sees the collapsed sawmill, sees evidence that the partisans passed through here minutes ago. He signals his team forward, keeping spread out in tactical formation. The dog handlers release their animals from the leads, letting them range forward to locate the exact trail. The dogs bound into the clearing, noses down, tracking the scent. That's when they encounter the swarm, 100,000 honeybees, fully agitated, defending their territory. The dogs run directly into the densest part of the swarm, still circling the 3 oak trees. The bees attack instantly. They evolve to defend against bears, against animals that raid hives for honey. Dogs are similar-sized threats exhibiting aggressive behavior in close proximity to the hives. The bees swarm the dogs immediately, covering them in seconds, stinging repeatedly. The dogs panic. They bolt, yelping in pain and terror, running in random directions. One runs directly back toward the German soldiers. It's covered in bees, hundreds of them clinging to its fur, more arriving every second. The soldiers see a dog running toward them, covered in a black swarming mass. They don't immediately understand what they're seeing. Then the bees reach them. Bees identify threats by carbon dioxide concentration. Exhaled breath contains high CO2 levels. The bees target the soldiers' faces, specifically their mouths and noses. They aim for the eyes. Sergeant Becker receives his first sting on his cheek, then his forehead, then his neck. Within 5 seconds, he's received 15 stings. He tries to swat the bees away, but there are too many. They're in his hair, on his face, crawling inside his collar. His soldiers are screaming, thrashing, running. One soldier drops his rifle and sprints blindly back toward the south, arms windmilling, trying desperately to escape the swarm. He's covered in bees. Another soldier falls to the ground, curling into a ball, hands over his face, as hundreds of bees sting every exposed area of skin. The dog handlers try to recall their animals, but the dogs are beyond control, running in circles, rolling on the ground, yelping continuously. 2 of the dogs collapse, overwhelmed by the massive number of stings. Becker realizes the situation is hopeless. He shouts for retreat, but his voice is thick and slurred because his throat is swelling from multiple stings. He turns and runs south, back the way they came, pursued by a cloud of furious bees. His team follows, those still capable of movement. They abandon weapons, equipment, the dogs. They just run. Behind them, the swarm continues to boil around the 3 oak trees, tens of thousands of bees circling in a defensive perimeter that will remain active for hours. The German encirclement collapses. Wehrmacht doctrine for anti-partisan operations requires maintaining continuous contact with the target. The tracker team was the spearhead, the element maintaining that contact. When the tracker team breaks and retreats, When the dogs are killed or incapacitated, when the soldiers are unable to continue pursuit, the entire operation halts. The German company commander, positioned 800 meters south of the sawmill, receives garbled radio reports about his tracker team being attacked by some kind of swarm of insects. He doesn't understand. He orders another unit to advance and investigate. That unit refuses to enter the clearing after seeing the first team emerge, soldiers covered in welts, faces swollen, 2 men unconscious from allergic reaction to the massive number of stings. A medical officer examines the casualties. Honeybees, he concludes, picking stingers from one soldier's face. Hundreds of stings. These men need immediate hospital treatment. Severe toxic reaction. The company commander stares at the clearing through binoculars. He can see the swarm, a dark haze, moving around the distant trees. He's never encountered anything like this in 2 years of anti-partisan operations. Can we bypass the clearing? Circle around? Yes, sir, but that will take hours. We'll lose contact with the partisan group. Do we have any way to disperse the bees? Smoke, perhaps? Fire? Start fires in the forest, and we'll have bigger problems than bees. The company commander makes a decision. Pull back. Reform our perimeter to the south. We'll establish blocking positions and wait. The partisans are still in the area. We'll find them again. But by the time German forces reorganize and attempt to resume pursuit, Pyotr's group has broken through the thin northern section of the encirclement and disappeared into the depths of Naliboki forest. Pyotr leads his group north for 3 more hours, moving fast, putting maximum distance between themselves and the German forces. They hear no pursuit. The dogs are gone, killed, or incapacitated. The Germans have lost their tracking capability. At 2000 hours, as light fades, Pyotr calls a halt in a dense thicket near a stream. His fighters collapse, completely exhausted. Several are nursing bee stings, their faces swollen, but nobody received enough stings to cause serious reaction. Alexei, the wounded fighter, is still alive, semi-conscious but stable. Viktor sits beside Pyotr, removing his boots, examining blisters. "That was the most insane tactical decision I've ever witnessed," he says quietly. "Using bees as a weapon. Did it work? We're alive. The Germans are gone. I'd say it worked." Pyotr doesn't respond immediately. He's thinking about the hives, about the colonies he disturbed so violently. Those bees were just defending their homes, doing what evolution programmed them to do. They killed dogs and injured soldiers because humans brought war into their territory. "My father told me bees are honest," Pyotr says finally. "They don't lie. They don't hate. They just protect what matters to them. Maybe we could learn from that." Viktor snorts. Philosophy from a beekeeper partisan. What's next? Tactical advice from a baker. I was thinking more about farmers and field rotation strategies. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and fear and violence, Viktor laughs. Others hear him and begin laughing too, the kind of slightly hysterical laughter that comes after surviving something that should have killed you. They survived because Pyotr Volsky knew bees better than the Wehrmacht knew forests. Over the following months, word spreads through partisan networks about the beekeeper who stopped a German encirclement with wild honeybee swarms. Other groups try to replicate the tactic with mixed success. Some find wild hives and successfully use them to create diversions. Others get stung badly and learn that disturbing bees requires expertise most partisans don't possess. Wehrmacht anti-partisan units begin noting locations of bee colonies in their operational planning, marking them as hazards to avoid. Some German commanders order destruction of wild hives in areas where they plan operations. This proves counterproductive because it eliminates important pollinators, reducing crop yields in areas the Germans need to feed their occupation forces. Pyotr's group continues operating through 1943 and into 1944. They sabotage rail lines, ambush supply convoys, provide intelligence to Soviet forces. Pyotr uses his knowledge of the forest to keep his fighters alive, leading them through terrain Germans won't follow, finding shelter where no shelter should exist. He never deliberately disturbs bee colonies again. It was necessary once, in desperate circumstances, but it violated principles he'd spent his life honoring. After the war, if he survives, he plans to return to beekeeping, to working with bees peacefully, helping them rather than weaponizing them. In July 1944, Soviet forces liberate Belorussia. The Wehrmacht retreats west, under pressure from massive Soviet offensives. Partisan groups emerge from the forests and link up with regular army units. The occupation is over. Pyotr Volsky survives the war. His partisan group, which started with 23 fighters running for their lives, ends with 47 fighters welcoming Soviet tanks into liberated territory. After the war, Pyotr returns to what remains of his village. His house was burned by Germans in 1942. His workshop is rubble. But the forest remains, and the bees remain. He spends 5 years rebuilding. He constructs new hives, captures swarms, reestablishes his colonies. By 1949, he's operating 200 hives again. The honey tastes the same as it did before the war. The bees work the same flowers, follow the same patterns, maintain the same complex societies they've maintained for millions of years. Pyotr is older now, marked by the war in ways that don't show in scars. But when he works with his bees, moving slowly among the hives, listening to the hum of contented colonies, checking frames heavy with honey, he finds something like peace. Viktor visits him in 1951. The former partisan second-in-command is now a collective farm administrator, managing agricultural production for the district. They sit outside Pyotr's small cottage, drinking tea, watching bees work the wildflowers that grow in the meadow. "Do you ever think about that day?" Viktor asks. "The sawmill clearing?" "Sometimes. I told that story to my children. They didn't believe me. They said bees can't stop German soldiers." Pyotr smiles. "Bees can't stop soldiers. Fear can. Panic can. Sometimes you don't need to defeat an enemy. You just need to make them stop long enough for you to escape. And you learned that from keeping bees?" "I learned that from understanding that every living thing protects its home. Bees, humans, we're not so different. We all have things we'll fight for when we have no other choice." Viktor considers this. "You could have written a tactical manual, The Beekeeper's Guide to Partisan Warfare." "I'd rather write about honey production and pollination patterns. Less exciting, more useful." They sit in comfortable silence, two men who survived when they shouldn't have, watching bees do what bees have always done, moving between flowers and hive, carrying out the ancient work of their species, indifferent to human wars and human stories. In the years that follow, Pyotr Volsky becomes known throughout the region not as a partisan hero, but as the man who produces the best honey in Belorussia. He teaches young people the craft of beekeeping, passing on knowledge his father taught him, his grandfather taught his father, continuing a tradition that stretches back generations. He never tells his students about June 17, 1943. That's not a beekeeping story. That's a war story. And the war is over. But sometimes, when he stands among his hives on summer evenings, listening to the collective hum of 300,000 bees working in the late light, Pyotr remembers. He remembers the sawmill clearing, the sound of the swarm erupting from the hollow oaks, the screams of German soldiers encountering something their training never prepared them for. He remembers being a different person in a different time, using knowledge meant for nurturing life to create chaos sufficient to save his people. The bees remember nothing. They work their flowers, tend their young, build their comb, store their honey. They do what bees have always done, what they'll continue doing long after humans and their wars are forgotten. And that, Pyotr thinks, is exactly as it should be.